Good morning, everyone, and selamat datang ke Kuala Lumpur. Welcome to Kuala Lumpur, and thank you very much, Joe, for inviting me for this conference. This is my first time, so I'm really excited to be sharing with you on my home ground, so to speak. So I know not all of you are into language education, but I think language transcends everything that we do, and I believe that the foundation that we set from school right up to, we say from campus to career is really important, but we often just go along with whatever policies are in place in our various countries, various institutions, without thinking of the long-term repercussions. So that's something I'm really interested in, and I'd like to share with you Malaysia's perspective, and maybe we can all reflect and think about the lessons that we can learn, even if we're not directly in the area, to think about where language comes in your own work, yeah, or your research, and also your practice. So, okay. Oops. Okay, let's see if this works. Okay, right. So let me start with something that's in the news. And when I like looking at the media and different kinds of media, because you know that if you just look at one type of media, you could get a very biased opinion. So when we look at the news, and this is in Malaysia, say over the last 3 years or so, I'm just highlighting some things that we will see. And in the media, you kind of get a sense of what's hot, what the policymakers or the government is saying, what the people, in terms of opinion pieces, and what discussions are being brought up in both social media and also the normal media. Right, so if we look at this, and I've kind of boxed up certain things. For those of you not familiar with Malaysia, we are multilingual, but then you'll see that comes with a caveat as well, like other things. So we've got, you can see here something on the national language. So, and this is very recent, so you'll be thinking, why are we still talking about empowering Malaysians with our national language, the Malay language, right? I mean, this should already be put in place. And then we also have English. So people talking about English, why are we not focusing on English? Why are we still not, why are graduates not good in English? You keep getting this like, oh, this is like a perennial issue in the media. Okay, then we got something on Sarawak. So we have two states on the island of Borneo, if you are not familiar with it, Sabah and Sarawak. Any Sabah and Sarawakians here in the audience? Nobody from East Malaysia, but you saw the performances, the dart blowing, so that was from East Malaysia, and also the bamboo dance. But anyway, you can see that Sarawak, and I'll talk a little bit about this in a while, they are like saying, no, we're going to still use English in schools, and then you're wondering, wait a minute, what is the medium of instruction in Malaysia? Is it Malay? Is it English? What is it? Why is one state in the country calling for English to be used as a medium of instruction, okay? Then you've got also Mandarin. So we've got about we've got 34 million, our population. The 2020 census put the Chinese people of Chinese ethnicity in Malaysia at about 25%, okay? So it's kind of 25 to 25%. So it's quite a large, not even a minority really, okay, it's like 1/4 of our population are of Chinese ethnicity, but you can see now that non-Chinese people are also looking at learning Mandarin in Malaysia, okay, so it's an important language. So it's not just English anymore, we're seeing Mandarin being forefronted. Then you've got also the Tamil. So I just spoke to someone who can speak Tamil, Shamila, who shares the same name with me, yay. So this was actually in the Times of India, who was looking at how Malaysians of Tamil ethnicity still, not all of us, but Tamil is still being used quite a lot in Malaysia. And how is that when we have Malay as well? And then you've got other languages coming in, such as Iban, the dart blowing, okay, that was representing Iban, okay. So Iban language degree program. So now we're going into heritage languages. Now this is something quite new, I would say, we're seeing people talking about heritage languages. You got Iban, then you have something which is in Malay, which is talking about a diploma bahasa ethnic, so you can guess it's ethnic languages, a diploma in ethnic languages, and 3 languages, Iban, Semai, and Kadazan Dusun. Kadazan Dusun, Iban in East Malaysia. Semai is an indigenous language in the peninsula. Okay, so these three languages come up. So you'll be wondering why all these languages and why in terms of education. Yeah, all right, just to see. Oops. Okay. All right, so let me just start with giving you a bit of linguistic context for Malaysia. And essentially, just a very, very quick kind of snapshot, if you like, that we have about, now, you know, it's really hard to actually define what a language is, so take this with a large pinch of salt. About 131 languages, 130 living languages, okay? And if you, it's 80% of these languages are actually classified as indigenous languages. So languages of the indigenous people of the Orang Asli of Peninsular Malaysia, and in East Malaysia, we have so many languages, okay? But you can also see that institutionally, a very small percentage institutional languages, meaning those that are taught in schools, okay? And the majority of our languages are classified as being endangered, which means that there is very little transference of language or intergenerational transmission of the language to the younger generation. So which means with some of these languages having populations of, some of the languages I've worked with like 200 speakers, out of which maybe less than 50% are fluent speakers. You can imagine that in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, these languages will not exist, and they don't exist in the rest of the world, so they're only found in Malaysia, some of them. Then that's it, right? These languages are going to disappear. So out of all these 130 languages, and if you looked at the newspaper kind of extracts that I showed you, you find that really only 4 languages are far-fronted, okay? So Malay, which is our national and official language, and then English, because that is the compulsory subject taught in schools, all right, and used extensively in urban areas like Kuala Lumpur. If you go around, most people will be able to speak English. Not only do we learn it from school, from primary school, right up to secondary, and also in universities, public universities, but it's also used extensively in the private sector, okay, in the private sector. Then, as I said, Mandarin. Mandarin is really coming very strong. It has been, but now increasingly so. And there's also Tamil. So the Tamils, the Indian population is very small, about 7%, and the majority of the Indian population in Malaysia are of Tamil ethnicity. We also have those Tamils from Sri Lanka as well, and India, but the majority are from South India. Yeah, we also have other Indian groups as well. All right, so these 4 languages are the ones that you will see taking precedence. If you go around, if you have time to go around, you will see quite a bit of Chinese in Petaling Street area. Tamil, not so much. Okay, all right. Oops. All right, this is not cooperating with me. Okay, here we go. All right, so that's just a very quick snapshot. And I do urge you, if you walk around KLCC, KLCC may be not a good example, but if you go beyond into Petaling Street and so on, you'll hear the sort of medley of languages that we use in Malaysia, yeah? So now, that's the context, but let's look at what policies are or have been, and I want to show you how this has actually affected how different generations use language in Malaysia, all right? So if we think about the past, okay, because I do believe that in order to understand where we're going, we do need to have an understanding of what was, and we talk about rethinking things, but we need to understand why people did things in the past and what the repercussions of those are even today. So a lot of legacies that are left behind, and people who still stick to legacies without considering the changing world. Right? I'm not going beyond the 18th century. I'm focusing here basically because this is when, the British started to make a presence. So in Singapore, Malacca, Penang, which then became the Straits Settlement, and then they kind of expanded to the rest of Malaysia. So what, right? because of education. So when the British came, not only did English become the language of administration, as you can imagine, okay, they also started setting up schools, and there were a lot of mission schools as well, Catholic schools, especially Catholic schools, okay? So, and these schools, again, you can guess, were in mainly this urban areas or cities of those days, right? And these were English medium schools. So there were other medium schools. There were religious schools, and there were like Arabic schools. There were Tamil schools in the plantations. There were Chinese schools. But once the British started setting up these schools, and these schools, you had primary and secondary, these became the go-to, right? If you could afford it or you had the opportunity, you wanted to be educated in these schools. And English then took precedence over other languages, because you have English, you can get a job as a clerk maybe at that time, right? In the British administration, or you then had some kind of power, social power and economic power, or you at least in terms of mobility, right? Then upon independence, of course, like most countries, you have to make a decision, right? So now you're newly independent. Do you stick to English as one of your major languages or official languages? Some countries did that. So in Malaysia, because the majority of population are Malay speaking, we decided on Malay as our national language, okay? But then now you have a transition period, because you went from doing a lot of official things in English to now having to switch to Malay, right? So that wasn't an easy transition, because then people held on to the belief, and they still do, that English is number one, okay? And that has a lot of effects that we can see even today. Now, then in 1960, and so at that point, there was supposed to be a transition. So you had time given to start using English in Parliament, Malay in Parliament, to start schools being taught in Malay, to use a national curriculum, because at that point, what was the priority? What was the thinking? We needed to build our nation. So we needed people, Malaysians of different ethnicities, different languages, to be able to speak Malay, communicate with each other, learn in Malay, learn the same subjects, learn our history, learn our geography, and so on, right? Then in 1963, we became Malaysia. So we were not always Malaysia. We were Malaya. And then we became Malaysia in 63, together with Singapore, who then said goodbye to us a couple of years later. So upon then, when we set up Malaysia, that's when the Sabah and Sarawak in East Malaysia joined us. Now, they then were still doing things in English, right? Because they had a longer period of sort of having the British administration there. So now they were given extra time to switch to Malay for public administration, for example, and for schools. But you will see today is the first slide where Sarawak says we're going to continue using English, right? So that goes back to whatever was agreed upon in 1965, okay? Or 63, rather, in 1963. So legacy still remains, so they're still saying, no, we still want to maintain English as one of our official languages, okay? Although constitutionally, Malay is the official language, okay? So by the 1970s, so early 1970s, okay, by the time I went to school, and I'm old, okay, I already did everything in the Malay medium, okay? And the transition was not an easy transition. So at that time, if you wanted to go to secondary school, at first, there were only English medium secondary schools, okay? So by the early 1970s, the transition took place, so that by 1983, all secondary schools in Malaysia, the government ones, had to be Malay medium, okay? But not at primary level, so I'll show you in a bit. By the 2000s, you can see the late 1990s when the towers, so Petronas Towers actually kind of signals a lot of changes that were happening in the country. It was very rapid, also in terms of language education, because then policies were being made to use English. So remember, we transitioned to Malay up to university, yeah? So my university, which was largely English medium, had to switch to English. But then by the 1990s, it was like, hey, let's do some subjects in English or do tutorials in English, okay? Although there was no like black and white policies about that. Okay, so a lot of things happened. Oops, sorry. Okay, that was me going too fast. Oh, can you just go back? Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. Okay, just very quickly, if you look at, I said at primary level, we actually have 4 mediums of instruction. Oh, 3 actually, right? Malay, so you can go to a Malay school, Tamil school, or Chinese, Mandarin school, and these are government schools. But at the secondary level, everything becomes Malay medium, okay? But English, it will be taught as a compulsory subject. But we also have international schools, and because of policy changes, so we think about rethinking education per se, we decided that we were going to go international, all right? We were going to give a choice to parents to choose what kind of education they want. So in my time, you could only go to government schools if you were Malaysian. You could not go to international schools. And if you went to private schools, you were a failure, because you couldn't go back into the government system, you had to go to a private school. So private school was looked down upon. But now, the majority, and we are one of the largest in terms of the number of schools and students, at least in Southeast Asia, we definitely have a big number of international schools still mushrooming, okay? So this is all part of, so government policies, not just education policies, right? Government economic policies influence what happens in education. And I think all of us need to be aware of that, because otherwise we don't keep up with what's happening in our countries and institutions, okay? And you can see that the majority of people now in these schools are Malaysians. Now, going back to what our philosophy was when we were first became Malaya then Malaysia, we wanted common curriculum, common language of education. But now, we have 2 separate cohorts of Malaysian, if you like. And you can guess that those who can afford to go to these schools are of a certain socioeconomic group. So this now creates a kind of gap between Malaysians, okay? And because the medium of instruction in most of these international schools would be English, right? And these kids, or these children, generally come from already bilingual or English-speaking homes. So again, linguistically, this creates a gap which goes on to affect people, the students coming from different cohorts, the international government, in terms of job placements, in terms of job opportunities. So it affects socioeconomic, our ecology, right? Our socioeconomic ecology. Okay, I'm rushing a bit because I'm kind of mindful of time, because we do want to leave some time for Q&A. So these are some things as we think about education. For Malaysia, the blue, right, is the same. So Malay is our national language, is our official language. Then we have the language of education, where we allow in the government sector 3 languages for primary education. And then when we think about language of employability and business and all the employers associations always saying, oh, your graduates, English is terrible, it's always English, right? So English dominates in the employment sector, private especially, but also government. And then in terms of language of education, which one is dominant? Well, in the international sector, English. In the public sector, Chinese schools are becoming increasingly popular, even among non-Chinese parents, as you saw in the first article, the articles that I showed you, okay? Right. Now, where does that lead our poor heritage languages? Remember, 131 languages, but we only see generally Malay and English, and now Mandarin. Even Tamil is kind of like, okay, you do your own thing, right? So this is an issue in many countries, especially where it's not just about the people of the country, but now with migration and, and whether we are work migrants or whether we are dealing with an international audience in terms of our students, in terms of our workplace, but we don't deal with it really in terms of policy, yeah? Okay, so in Malaysia, well, do we teach other languages? Yes, I won't go too much into detail, but increasingly so. In the past, it was just the boarding schools, right, where they had French and German. But now, even the day schools, we have like Korean, Japanese, Arabic being taught as a 3rd language, because the policy was, oh, you can learn a 3rd language, but you can see the 3rd languages are not our heritage languages. They are generally foreign languages, right? French, German, Korean, Japanese, and so on. So that's kind of an interesting rethinking of, oh, let's have 3rd language, but which 3rd language? Okay, so that's policy, just very quickly to kind of marry the two. What happens in practice? I'll just show you again a snapshot of typical Malaysians, okay? This where most Malays, so the majority of our population, Malay speakers would speak Malay. So if you live in Kuala Lumpur or KL, as we say, KL, okay, you would speak a social dialect of Malay, all right, and also standard Malay if you go to school, of course. But when we speak to each other, generally we use colloquial Malay or social Malay or a dialect. So every state kind of has their own regional dialect that are not always mutually intelligible, okay? And then English, because you learn it in school, but of course, depending on your social circumstances, education background, where you live, your level of English will be very different. Okay, so it's not the same for every Malaysian. The Chinese respondents, if you look at the Chinese students, these were university students that we surveyed, they generally Malay English because they learn in school, but their dominant language, okay, 100% of us, the respondents, Mandarin. They all went to Chinese medium, even preschools and primary schools, then went to secondary school. Mandarin was their main language. I think about maybe 2% of them actually still spoke either Cantonese or Hokkien at home. But even at home, even though their parents were Cantonese speakers, Hokkien speakers, Fuchao speakers, they didn't speak those languages at home anymore. Okay, so that this switch is already very, very prominent in Malaysia. All right, among the Indian respondents, if they were Tamils, not many of them went to Tamil schools. Most of them went to Malay medium, and they, again, depending on the family background, they might still speak Tamil. Either colloquial Tamil or standard Tamil, depending on whether they went to Tamil schools. Okay, now very, very quickly, if we look at this chart, you can see the difference in terms of which language dominates at which point of education. So you see Malay in terms of like up to about secondary school, all right? And then the dip, and English takes over after secondary school. So post-secondary, like sixth form, A-levels, matriculation, whatever, it's already English, even in university. Unless, now you may see a lot of Arabic there because some of our respondents were doing Arabic-related courses or Islamic studies where they do a lot. They speak Arabic and they do a lot of things in Arabic, okay? So this is the Malaysian snapshot, all right? And I just want to touch on the English that we speak. So I, obviously, if I'm speaking to fellow Malaysians informally, I do not speak like this, all right? So we have a Malaysian variety, and I think in terms of rethinking education as well, there is sometimes an issue with looking at this variety like this, right? So there is a sense of linguistic conservatism, if you like, because you always want to look at colloquial Malaysian English as bad English. So by many of us who are fluent in English, who speak English even as our home language, we also have the standard variety. So it's like we switch, right? We use it even in the same utterance. Sometimes we switch. But there are people who feel that Malaysian English should be gotten rid of. We should not be speaking the Malaysian variety, colloquial variety. We should only be speaking British English. Okay. So going back to colonial legacies as well. Now, if these are the policymakers who have that kind of thinking, who think that I should be saying dark web rather than dark web, which is my pronunciation of dark web, or handbag, not handbag. It's really stressful on the teachers and stressful on the students. And then at the end of the day, what is your outcome? Right? What is your outcome? So this is an issue with policymakers who have a certain kind of thinking that doesn't take into account everything that's going around. Okay, I will rush through. Okay, all right. I won't go through this. We can talk about it later. Now, I want to come back to heritage languages. At the end of the day, it's just a downward spiral because it doesn't feature much. Okay, in the discourse or narratives of the politicians, the press, and the people as well. And I mean, why bother, right? People would say, I've been asked this a lot of times. I get interviewed and, the press asks me, yeah, I mean, it's just a natural phenomena. Languages die, new languages take over. It's a survival of the fittest. I leave that to you to ponder upon because I think we all have our own take on it. So in Malaysia, there are at least three indigenous languages that are actually taught in schools, okay? Up to secondary school, Kadazan and Iban, all right? And as you saw in the newspaper, kind of the snippets that I showed, there seems to be more emphasis now on, hey, let's get people trained, more people to actually do this as part of their education. Iban, Kadazan, Dusun, this is Sabah and Sarawak, and Semai is one of our indigenous languages in Peninsular Malaysia. Bidayo started at preschool, but not sure what's going on there. So out of all our languages, okay, it's really, really hard to bring it into the school system. So maybe we need to rethink, how do we bring in heritage languages in the country? Just an example of Joe mentioned my work with Malacca Portuguese. So good morning is Bung Pamyang to everybody here. So this is some of the materials that we produce to help children learn in the village in Malacca. We've also got a dictionary app where, you know, people can have easy access to looking for words. Oh, what's the English? What's the Kristang word for this? And so on. So using technology, this is very, I mean, in this today's date, today, technology changes. So, you know, an app today will be like, whoa, you know, when I first did my CD was like, wow, you know, CD, right? And now who uses a compact disc anymore? So these are things that, you know, we need to think about when we want to rethink education, and especially when it comes to heritage languages, whether we want to bring it to the community, and as researchers, or how do we bring it to the community? How do we work with communities in order to help communities that want to revitalize and keep their language going? I think the dependence on the policy at just the government level is not going to work, but the policies can support, right, in terms of resources. Okay, so lessons from Malaysia, we are multilingual. We have kind of decided on certain languages, but that has the repercussions of that, and certain policies like international versus government, that has affected practice, and that affects you know, our social kind of how we are together, right? So I urge you that when we, at any point when we're thinking about how language education should be, because it affects everything, we have to think about it as an ecology. We cannot think about it just in terms of, oh, just the language curriculum. Oh, is it standard or not standard? We have to take into account a lot of things. I'm happy to share my slides if you want to, because we're running out of time. Just send me an email and I will send it to you, okay? And I showed you also actual use. What happens? That's this generation. Very different from my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation. We already lost Kristang in my family in terms of what we use at home, okay? So policies do affect practice, okay? And practice is not just about language proficiency, it's about, can you get a job? Can you speak, if you can't speak Mandarin, does it matter? If you don't speak a heritage language, does it matter? Okay, so, and in terms of heritage language education, as I said, you have to think about advocacy, like telling people, hey, Malaysia has this number of languages, hey, we can do this, you know, stop just grabbing and going, doing the research, but not giving back to communities. And then collaborating with communities, not depending on official curriculums, okay? So very quickly, those 3 points I want to leave you with, i.e., I want to leave you with how language policies can need to look at the whole ecology of things, how practice and policy kind of meet or don't meet, converge, they don't always converge. And lastly, in terms of heritage languages, let's rethink how we do our heritage languages. And yep, so I will leave you with that, yeah. And my email is in the thing, I think, yeah? Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor Pillai. We have about five minutes or so for Q&A. Do we have any, there's a gentleman with this.
Hi. Stephanie, thank you very much. This was a very, very important presentation to me. I just give a background of myself. I'm Hesbon from Tokyo University of Science in Japan. And I'm currently doing a project in revitalizing and preserving endangered languages in Africa through building corpus linguistics. Great. And you've mentioned a lot of factors that are similar to African situation. Yes. And I'm very happy that in Malaysia, you teach indigenous languages in schools.
3.
That's what
Only 3, yeah.
We are advocating for in Africa. Yeah. And I saw your characterization of languages in Malaysia. We have the endangered languages and the stable languages.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, apart from institutionalization, what factors have led to the stable languages being stable and the endangered languages to be endangered? Just like in Africa, actually the most important factor or adverse factor is the institutionalization, where the world lingua franca, the French and the English have taken over the institutions, and people and parents.
It's a question. If you can, could you respond to the question?
sure.
Okay,
I think
the second question.
Sorry, no.
Okay.
We've got very little time for questions.
You can ask me later at coffee or something.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want me to answer first?
Please.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same situation. So, it's basically about which language becomes the language of communication, which language becomes the language of education, and which language the economic opportunities puts at the top. That's it, right? So that's just very similar reasons, I would say. Yeah, I think we have one more question. Yeah.
Hi, good morning, Professor. My name is Dr. William. I'm from Singapore. I think we also have this problem about language survivability for the heritage language.
Yeah.
So I just want to find out, in what way can digital media or social media help to revitalize or keep heritage language going?
Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, if I talk about Malacca Portuguese, the youth now have taken that on, right? So they post a lot of things and they start using it on social media, where previously they would use English. Also, teachers are teaching the language using social media, even using WhatsApp to form groups where they can practice communicating, and then having online. I think COVID was good for some heritage languages, because people went online and decided, hey, I can teach you online. You can be anywhere in Malaysia. I can teach you online. So so I think social media and whatever new emerging media is coming on has a big role to play. During COVID, for indigenous, sending the message about COVID, we use TikTok a lot. Yeah, and the youth were great at doing, how and communicating in their language, because we realized that having posters, using the national language, for people who don't read in their language, or trying to write the indigenous languages when people don't actually write in their languages, was of no use. We had to use more audio visual methods. So so absolutely, important.
Yeah, Dr. Pillai, thank you very much. I just wanted to know, you mentioned something about the use of Mandarin schools and its popularity. Can you tell me what are the reasons behind it? Could it be school curriculum, teacher size? What makes that?
Okay, two things I think. One is Chinese schools are at least perceived to be more disciplined, very good at teaching math. So that was the initial reason. But as Mandarin has become more important, right? I mean, we have very strong relations with China, economically, socially as well. So having Mandarin as another language in Malaysia actually gives you a lot more opportunities. So that's the second reason, and I think becoming the more important reason. And it's not just among the Chinese. So Chinese families, almost all Chinese families, even if they don't speak Mandarin at home, are sending their kids to Chinese schools for primary schools. Non-Chinese parents are also wanting to send their parents for that reason. Generally, they want them to be able to speak Mandarin, so that they have an extra oomph when they go out in the world. Yeah.
We have time for one more question.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I missed the first part of your talk, but I have a question about the impact of the language on performance. Okay. In other places, there's a link between the language spoken at home and performance, particularly in science and TIMSS and PISA studies. Have you noticed anything that happened in Malaysia, the same thing?
Sorry, I didn't get the first part, the language of what?
Questions about the impact of language on performance, whether it's English language or science or any subjects.
Okay, in terms of performance education-wise? Okay, so I didn't have time to go through, but we had a policy that in 2003, if I'm not mistaken, and it lasted about 9 years, with a policy to teach science and math, all science and mathematics subjects, science, math, technological subjects, so engineering, so on, right up to university level, had to be taught in English, okay? So that caused a big uproar because the teachers were being trained in Malay, people like me, we did everything in Malay as well. So, so that didn't, why? So then people did a lot of research on whether that was affecting students' performance, their science and math, now that they had to learn it in English. And generally the consensus was students were not doing well, especially students in rural areas or where they didn't have a lot of opportunities in terms of having English in their environment, were not doing as well as if they were doing it in Malay, all right? Or in Tamil, or the Chinese schools fought for bilingual, teach in both languages. So poor Chinese students in Chinese schools had to learn in Mandarin, math and science, and in Malay. Okay, the other schools had to all switch to English. So after 9 years, there was just a lot of, also it was political, it was also based on research that showed performance was not good. It was dropping for science and math when they switched to English, okay? But because English is very much associated, people don't like me saying this, but it's very much associated with socioeconomic status as well. So in terms of like now, parents are still fighting. You saw in the newspaper thing where there were people saying, bring back English, why are we not teaching science and math in English again? Because certain part of our population wants it to continue in English. But it works for them, but it doesn't work for the rest of the population who need to learn basics in primary schools in Tamil or Mandarin, Malay.